And I would like to kick off this conference with my keynote that is called The 7 Sins. And we're going to talk about those 7 sins, of course, and how they map to IT security, what we can learn from that, and how they actually affect our daily life. My name is Mario, and you might know me as the director and founder of Cure 53. Back in the day, I was a researcher, mostly admin work today. I still maintain DOM Purify as a JavaScript library to prevent cross-site scripting, and you can reach out to me if you feel like it using those means shown downstairs. With no further ado, I would like to kick this off with a small disclaimer. We're talking a little bit about like religious themes, and those might be offensive to one or the other person here, and I would like to just like clearly indicate that I mean no offense. And if I indeed say something that is offending you, then please let me know so I can do better the next time. With that out of the way, we would like to directly get started with the structure of this keynote. Sermon number 1, let's talk about the 7 sins. What are they? What do we need to know about them? And how do they map to IT security? Sermon number 2, let's talk about the 7 virtues, like the counterpart thereof. And last but not least, the third sermon, which is the pathway to heaven, where we can improve ourselves to actually arrive at the point of no longer being prone to falling for those sins and opting more for those virtues. Let's talk about the 7 sins. And let's talk a little bit about history and think about where they actually came from. Who came up with those things? Well, the origins are ancient, as with many things these days. And it can be attributed to the Roman writers back then in the day, including Horace, who extolled a list of virtues. And to make sure that we have a matching counterpart, they also listed the opposite thereof, the vices. And they also preached the idea of getting rid of those vices and living towards those virtues to reach and achieve the state of wisdom. And then in Christianity, the concept was picked up and slowly manifested into what we know about this today. And it was in the early 4th century, written in a monastery by a monk called Evagrius Ponticus, who was the one who first time documented the virtues and the vices in a sort of bullet list. And back then he was a little bit more generous because he picked 8, but today we only have 7 left, but hey, that's not that bad. That is him actually, back then in the 4th century, writing down that kind of stuff. And here we have the origins, the very origins of the 7 sins. If you count properly, you will see that these are indeed 8. So 1 was removed. We're going to talk about which one that was very soon. So we have gula, gluttony. We have luxuria e fornicatio, lust and fornication. We have avaritia, avarice and greed. We have tristitia, when you're feeling depressed. We have ira, the wrath, acedia, the sloth. The vangaloria, the vainglory. And last but not least, superbia, the pride and the hubris. And those were eventually boiled down to the 7 sins. And that happened in the 6th century, mostly under the guidance of Pope Gregory I. He and his team revised that list, and they came up with the 7 candidates that made it in the end, that were lust and gluttony and greed and sloth and wrath and envy, and last but not least, pride. And then, of course, that hit the mainstream through Dante, who in his Divine Comedy picked up on those and made them accessible to a larger audience. And you can kind of think about them like the Ober's top 10 in a way. So let's talk about them right away and see what we have. We have, for example, lust. And we probably all know what lust means in the original sense, but we might be wondering, what does it actually mean in the sense of IT security? What does it mean for our world? Lust, or the uncontrollable desire. Well, as Neha already hinted in her first slide, this often manifests as the desire to access, control data, and at the end of the day, of course, power. Which could mean that we have the lust to exploit systems and get access to data that we shouldn't have to. Or that we, as seemingly benign players, gather too much data from our users in the first place. Or that we just overzealously adopt new technologies without thinking about them, without doing risk assessments or security reviews. And, well, you might remember this one case where they put the AI on MDN for Mozilla Developer Network and bad stuff happened. So, well. And it could also be in just like if we talk about engaging in overly long discussions for a bug bounty, where the finder insists that they should get money even if the bug is just a triviality. We could also talk about gluttony, the second of the 7 sins on that list, and wonder about, well, how could they actually transfer into our modern world? And with gluttony and the overindulgence, We can probably equate this simply with just like hoarding a lot of data, just like getting as much data as possible. In Germany, we know this word Datenreichtum. I find this beautiful. I'm not really sure if other languages have this, but this pretty much puts it right on spot. Or just as well, the overconsumption of resources that can lead to inefficiencies or vulnerabilities in the end, which holds for lots of technologies, but can also hold for us humans. If, for example, there's too much pressure put on us as engineers, as managers, as whatever we do, and then we burnt out and we can't handle the stress anymore. Or last but not least, not really spending the money where we should spend the money because, well, I could either put my money into a new security engineer or I could put the money into a Mercedes and drive 280 kilometers on the Autobahn. Well, the choice is yours at the end, but you can kind of guess what comes out and what is better. Then we have, of course, the topic of greed. And greed is very interesting in our field because with greed we can attribute lots of things. Because greed eventually boils down to the idea of achieving more profit for the expense of other important things, such as, for example, security. Cutting corners here and there, violating user privacy for monetary gain, and so on and so on. Or last but not least, just like not giving your employees proper training anymore and refusing to finance the training at conferences and events like this one. Or let's talk about the classic checkbox pen test. When someone comes and says like, well, we have to have a pen test because you understand the needs from compliance and so on, but it would be good if it just took one day and you could just run a scanner and export the report. It's good enough for us. We just need that rubber stamp. So again, this matches quite well. Although this is such an ancient concept, we still see it reflecting with lots of repercussions today. And then, of course, we have sloth. And sloth is also quite interesting because it might also affect all of us here in this or the other way. So with sloth, we might be referring to, for example, laziness. And that's a classic. Because it could be just like thinking about the laziness to maintain your systems properly and to patch them and update them properly. And we all know how annoying updates can be. We also know that in some situations updates can in fact be dangerous, but well, we still have to actually apply them or else. Or simply not following the news, missing that there was a critical bug in this or in that product. Let's, for example, talk about Atlassian or something like this, or Microsoft products in the recent past. And missing those kind of things would be tremendously bad for your IT security posture, both your own and the one of your company and your team. Then we have, of course, almost getting towards the end of the list, we have the topic of wrath. And with wrath, it's quite interesting because that actually manifests in many ways in IT, and specifically in IT security, where we can see destructive behaviors. The easiest example here, for example, for blind wrath would be denial of service or distributed denial of service, DDoS, where people just think about revenge attacks or just like doing damage and making sure that someone is hurt without even having the possibility of profiting from it. Another really bad idea that could be attributed or that could be connected to the idea of wrath is the idea of the hackback. Hacking back after you have been attacked is a generally terrible concept and it can't go well. Yet it is being preached in many areas and we should really think about if that is a fine idea or not. Or if you talk about the classic example of the disgruntled employee who might, in case a situation arises and the job has been lost or some other tensions arise at work, simply use the powers that they have to do destructive stuff in the company itself and know, well, in our internal network to which I still have access, I can do so many things, so let's do some bad stuff here, persist ourselves and install a backdoor. And then, even closer to the end of the list, we have the topic of envy. Apologies. And the topic of envy is interesting because that is an actually not that easy one to map. Envy and jealousy in a cybersecurity context, how do we do this? The best I could actually come up with in this particular situation is the envy for other people's resources, intellectual property, data, and potentially leading to theft or even industrial espionage. Or potentially the idea again that the priorities are being shifted and that we're trying to kind of exfiltrate money from channels where we shouldn't and thereby weaken the security posture of everything. But, well, we could potentially also think about envy or jealousy in the opposite direction by inverting it and assuming that, well, no one is going to hack me or no one's going to hack us because I'm way less interesting of a target than anybody else, so I don't have to invest into cybersecurity because who would steal from us? We don't have that much, which is usually a fallacy as well. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be talking about pride. And pride is, of course, a very interesting topic in our field, in our realm, and needs some attention. And it is one of the final ones that we're going to be covering today. The overconfidence or even the hubris in IT security. Big egos amongst bug bounty hunters, big egos amongst hackers, big egos amongst managers, and all those leading to a false estimation of the situation itself, and thereby to, again, a weakening of the IT security posture. And one of the things that I have heard in the past from another security company that we pen tested was that, well, no one has ever found a critical in our application. And then it turns out that this was not the case, and they just didn't really search properly. And the hubris was weakening their outlook for this and was weakening their position because they already thought that they were perfect and forgot that they're not, and thereby they exposed themselves even more. We had another funny situation with another client a couple of years ago where we actually managed to get code execution on their server, and we found a PHP shell in one of their folders that didn't belong there, and they were so proud of their own security systems that they actually claimed to our faces, well, this was us putting the shell there for debugging purposes. All right, that's how you do it. Interesting. Anyway, let's now conclude on the 7 sins of InfoSec and how they map to IT security and to our modern world. And let's talk about the 7 virtues, because they're even more important, because this is where we want to go eventually. And with those 7 virtues, we need to think about, okay, how do we understand them and how do we apply them, and what does this eventually give us? Again, let's talk about the origins thereof. They popped up right between the idea of the 7 sins and the manifestation of the 7 sins as really being 7 and not just 8. And they came up in the 5th century by someone who was going by the name Prudentius. And they were called chastity, faith, the good works, the concord, the sobriety, the patience, and the humility. And they again gained traction more broadly through a poem that was battling between the female personifications of the virtues and the 7 sins, and then offering a showdown. And that poem, if you're interested, was called Psychomachia. Very interesting material, and might be useful to kind of deepen the material on this particular talk. So, here, we want to quickly go through them and summarize them and then already arrive at the conclusion of this talk because, hey, it's just the keynote and I have not much time left. So we have chastity, where we could assume that this refers in nowadays world to the use of technology and data in ethical manners and in responsible manners, to adhere to the principles of least privilege, maintaining appropriate boundaries regarding data access and use. Technically quite easy and something that we should be doing in the first place. Then we have the topic of temperance. To use a balanced approach to technology adoption. Do not jump on everything that is hot and new. Do not blindly install new appliances in your network, and make sure that there's always a decent and well-thought balance between security and functionality, because then the gaps are smaller and the risk of compromise is as well. Then we have the topic of charity, where we create and share secure code, we contribute to libraries, we contribute with patches, we submit pull requests on GitHub, and we contribute to the broader IT security landscape, and making sure that our knowledge doesn't go away with us, but that it's persisted, and that we actually give something back for all the things that we take. We have the topic of diligence, of course, another virtue where we need to be staying up to date with the latest and the greatest in terms of security threats and security defenses, and need to understand what we need to do tomorrow because of the things that happen today. We need to regularly review our own best practices and our own systems and strategies to make sure that they can't be compromised even if something really new pops up. The more you follow the trends, the more you have a chance to actually be secure against very recent attacks. And that's a fine thing as well. And that, of course, maps directly also to patience, where we need to be patient with our users, because our own expectations towards our own products and our own technologies might be different than the ones that our users have. Our users might be seeing things differently, might be perceiving things differently, might have different expectations, and with those, they might not adhere to the same level of security best practices that we would do. And we should not blame them for this, but we should support them and make sure that we pick up all our users right where they are and still give them a good and at the same time secure experiences with the platforms and the products that we offer. And almost last but not least, we have the topic of kindness, which is one of the most important ones in these barbaric times. We want to treat our users with respect, with understanding. We want to make sure that our applications, our systems are actually user-friendly as possible, because only with that good security can actually be adopted. If the system itself is not user-friendly enough, then it's very much unlikely that users will use it properly, and that means that they might stride on paths that are not well-trodden, and that means that they, again, at the end, weaken the security posture. And last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, we would like to talk about humility. And we would like to acknowledge, and that is most important here also in this context, that we don't know everything and we won't ever know everything, that there's always something that we don't have on the radar, and that there's like always so much to learn in this ever so quickly and rapidly evolving field of IT security. And events like this one here might help us to actually catch up, but we need to be aware that we can't know everything, and that our egos should be small and should be modest and should be humble, because it's a huge field, it's insanely complex, and no one can understand everything and be full stack anymore. So, to slowly arrive towards the end of this presentation. What did we learn today? Not much, I guess, but hey, it's a keynote. So we want to talk about what should we actually make out of this, the pathway to heaven. So what we learned today was maybe a little bit about history. And maybe that some of the things that are ancient and older than all of us combined in this room still have value and still last and still hold. And they still show us that there's like interesting foundations being created thousands of years ago, but still having relevance and repercussions today. So we see that there's parallels, that there's like lots of things that we can directly map from one to the other element and see, wow, that really clicks, that makes perfect sense. And if we follow that path, then bad consequences are due. And if we follow this other path, then we might do better in the end. And at the end of the day, we understand that the 7 virtues, contrary to the 7 sins, give us the opportunity for improvement every day, every week, every month, and every year. So my key argument here is, as usual, let's not make an aim for major leaps, but let's go for small steps, because that is the only thing that really works in IT security, especially in web security, many other branches. All the revolutionary technologies that we hope would solve issues, they kind of failed, but all the small steps like same-site cookies, etc., they had amazing effects, and those are the ones that actually get us to move forward. And that also kind of directly relates to us and our behaviors with technology and with the people that we interact with. We can just not become better people and smarter people and wiser people in one go. We cannot really take this one magical pill or read this one magical book and then we're there. It takes lots of small steps and lots of time and lots of work, and it is always an uphill battle to improve. And let's also keep in mind that we shouldn't put too much pressure on us to get back to the stress and the burnout. Nobody is perfect. Nobody in this room here is perfect. No one. Really, no one has their stuff together in full. And that is okay, because we're people. We're humans. And every day with tiny steps, we can just like improve a little bit. And that is what we should aim for, in my humble opinion. Small steps here and there. Learn, enhance, adopt, improve, and that connects directly to this event here, because those are the places, those are the spots, those are the times when we can actually do this collectively and talk to one another and socialize and learn new things and walk home as a little bit better of a person, and that's a fantastic thing. To sum it up, we have already digested that ancient knowledge and modern principles are actually still quite interconnected. We have already seen that lots of things can be done to actually go for constant betterment and improvement of yourself and the systems and the people and the ideas around you. And we can now use all this information and all this knowledge on this and many other events to learn and get inspired and make progress together. And at the end of the day, what we can achieve with this, and this I think is the most important and also probably the most motivating part, is make things more secure together without overdoing it or picking the wrong priorities or leaving the righteous path in the first place. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you very, very much. And I hope you have a beautiful day with the upcoming talks and events. And that's it. Thank you.